All right, guys. So I've tried this a couple of different times and I've messed it up every time because I had my volume on mute the first time that I recorded this screencast for you. So I'm going to play the original video that I had of this screencast, and I'm going to try to pair it up as best I can. So we're going to talk about ancient Chinese philosophies today, and those being Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. And you're going to look at how these philosophies grew over time in China. So we're going to watch three videos. And the first video is about Confucianism and Confucius and how he thought about this philosophy. So as you watch the video, I want you to take notes on the people of Confucianism. Like, what do they believe? What do they do? Then I want you to talk about what Confucius believed that the government, what role he believed the government should play, and then the importance of family in Confucianism as well. Well, what did the family do? How are you supposed to treat your family in Confucianism? So again, just take notes, come up with the definition as you are watching this video. That would be that would make sense, right? And then we'll go over that definition after the video and kind of talk about that.
Most people recognize his name and know that he is famous for having said something. But considering the long-lasting impact his teachings have had on the world, very few people know who Confucius really was, what he really said, and why. Amid the chaos of 6th century BCE China, where warring states fought endlessly among themselves for supremacy, and rulers were frequently assassinated, sometimes by their own relatives, Confucius exemplified benevolence and integrity, and through his teaching became one of China's greatest philosophers. Born to a nobleman but raised in poverty from a very young age following the untimely death of his father, Confucius developed what would become a lifelong sympathy for the suffering of the common people. Barely supporting his mother and disabled brother as a herder, an account keeper at a granary, and with other odd jobs, it was only with the help of a wealthy friend that Confucius was able to study at the Royal Archives, where his worldview would be formed. Though the ancient texts there were regarded by some as irrelevant relics of the past, Confucius was inspired by them. Through study and reflection, Confucius came to believe that human character is formed in the family and by education in ritual, literature, and history. A person cultivated in this way works to help others, guiding them by moral inspiration rather than brute force. To put his philosophy into practice, Confucius became an advisor to the ruler of his home state of Lu. But after another state sent Lu's ruler a troupe of dancing girls as a present, and the ruler ignored his duties while enjoying the girls in private, Confucius resigned in disgust. He then spent the next few years traveling from state to state, trying to find a worthy ruler to serve, while holding fast to his principles. It wasn't easy. In accordance with his philosophy, and contrary to the practice of the time, Confucius dissuaded rulers from relying on harsh punishments and military power to govern their lands, because he believed that a good ruler inspires others to spontaneously follow him by virtue of his ethical charisma. Confucius also believed that because the love and respect we learn in the family are fundamental to all other virtues, personal duties to family sometimes supersede obligations to the state. So when one duke bragged that his subjects were so upright that a son testified against his own father when his father stole a sheep, Confucius informed the duke that genuinely upright fathers and sons protected one another. During his travels, Confucius almost starved. He was briefly imprisoned, and his life was threatened at several points. But he was not bitter. Confucius had faith that heaven had a plan for the world, and he taught that a virtuous person could always find joy in learning and music. Failing to find the ruler he sought, Confucius returned to Lu and became a teacher and philosopher so influential that he helped shape Chinese culture, and we recognize his name worldwide, even today. For the disciples of Confucius, he was the living embodiment of a sage who leads others through his virtue, and they recorded his sayings, which eventually were edited into a book we know in English as the Analects. Today, millions of people worldwide adhere to the principles of Confucianism, and though the precise meaning of his words has been debated for millennia, when asked to summarize his teachings in a single phrase, Confucius himself said, "Do not inflict upon others that which you yourself would not want." 2,500 years later, it's still sage advice.
Okay, so I think what we can get from that video is that last part, right? Which is kind of the key to Confucianism, which is treat others the way you want to be treated. That golden rule, the rule that you've learned since kindergarten, right? He believed that, other people should treat each other with civility. So that being said, he believed people were naturally good, but they need to put the needs of their family and community before themselves. Like, for example, you see someone drop their books in the hallway, but you are so close to being late for class that you have to make the decision whether to be late for class or to help that person pick up the books. Well, in Confucianism, the idea is that you go and you help that person pick up the books because that's what you're taught to do, right? You can be late for your class because you are taught that you are to put the needs of your community, that person who just dropped their books, before your own. So, like that being said, um, the government is the one who is going to teach you and be that like moral compass for you. So in Confucianism, Confucius said that leaders are the example. They're the role model, like especially ethically and morally. So really it's moral leadership rather than ruling by law, right? That you can have laws, but really if you don't have that ethical and moral laws and example from the people in charge, then what are you doing? It doesn't make sense, right? So leaders, like a president, is supposed to be morally and ethically a leader. That's what Confucius says. Finally, Confucius also like finds that family is super important, right? That's why people are supposed to put their family before others. Main thing, respect your elders because they are the ones who are supposed to set an example for you. Okay. I always give like the example of Mulan. If you've ever watched Mulan, Mulan is very respectful of all of her elders, her mom, her grandmother, her father. That's important, especially in Chinese society. Very, very important today. All right. The next one is Taoism. So as you watch the video, focus on the people, the government, and especially meditation. Again, come up with your own definition of that.
That face that is usually covered by her phone.
It's difficult to know much for certain about the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. Even his name can be a little confusing. It's also sometimes translated as Lao Tzu or Lao Tse. Lao Tzu is said to have been a record keeper in the court of the central Chinese Zhou dynasty in the 6th century BC and an older contemporary of Confucius. He may also have been entirely mythical, much like Homer in Western culture. Lao Tzu is said to have tired of life in the Zhou court as it grew increasingly morally corrupt, so he left and rode on a water buffalo to the western border of the Chinese Empire. Although he was dressed as a farmer, the border official recognized him and asked him to write down his wisdom. According to this legend, what Lao Tzu wrote became the sacred text known as the Tao Te Ching. After writing this piece, Lao Tzu is said to have crossed the border and disappeared from history, perhaps to become a hermit. In reality, the Tao Te Ching is likely to be the compilation of the works of many authors over time, but stories about Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching itself passed down through different Chinese philosophical schools for over 2,000 years. Lao Tzu was the leading figure in the spiritual practice we now know as Taoism, which is more than 2,000 years old and still popular today. There are at least 20 million Taoists, and perhaps even 500 million living around the world now, especially in China and Taiwan. They practice meditation, chant scriptures, and worship a variety of gods and goddesses in temples. Taoists also make pilgrimages to 5 sacred mountains in eastern China in order to pray at the temples and absorb spiritual energy from these holy places, which are believed to be governed by immortals. Taoism is deeply intertwined with other branches of thought like Confucianism and Buddhism. There is a story about the 3 great Asian spiritual leaders, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Buddha. All were meant to have tasted vinegar. Confucius found it sour, much like he found the world full of degenerate people. And Buddha found it bitter, much like he found the world to be full of suffering. But Lao Tzu found the world sweet. This is telling because Lao Tzu's philosophy tends to look at the apparent discord in the world and see an underlying harmony guided by something called the Tao. The Tao Te Ching, which describes the Tao, is somewhat like the Bible. It gives instructions, often vague and generally open to multiple interpretations, on how to live a good life. It discusses the Tao as the way of the world, which is also the path to virtue, happiness, and harmony. The way isn't an inherently confusing or difficult thing, but in order to follow the Tao, we need to go beyond simply reading and thinking about it. Instead, we must learn flowing or effortless action. It's a sort of purposeful acceptance of the way of the Tao and living in harmony with it. This might seem lofty and bizarre, but most of Lao Tzu's suggestions are actually very simple. First, we ought to make more time for stillness. To the mind that is still, Lao Tzu said, the whole universe surrenders. We need to let go of our schedules, worries, and complex thoughts for a while and simply experience the world. We spend so much time rushing from one place to the next in life, but Lao Tzu reminds us, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. It's particularly important that we remember certain things, grieving, growing wiser, developing a new relationship, only happen on their own schedule, like the changing of leaves in the autumn or the blossoming of the bulbs we planted months ago. When we're still and patient, we also need to be open. The usefulness of a pot comes from its emptiness, Lao Tzu said. Empty yourself of everything, let your mind become still. If we're too busy, too preoccupied with anxiety or ambition, we will miss 1,000 moments of human experience that are our natural inheritance. We need to be awake to the sounds of the birds in the morning, the way other people look when they're laughing, the feeling of wind against our face. These experiences reconnect us to parts of ourselves. This is another key point of Lao Tzu's writing. We need to be in touch with our real, deeper selves. We spend a great deal of time worrying about who we ought to become, but we should instead take time to be who we already are at heart. We might rediscover a generous impulse or a playful side we'd forgotten, or simply an old affection for long walks. Our ego is often in the way of our true self, which must be found by being receptive to the outside world rather than focusing on some critical, too ambitious internal image. When I let go of who I am, Lao Tzu wrote, I become what I might be. Nature is particularly useful for helping us to find ourselves. Lao Tzu liked to compare different parts of nature to different virtues. He said, the best people are like water, which benefits all things and does not compete with them. It stays in lowly places that others reject. That is why it's so similar to the Tao. Each part of nature can remind us of a quality we admire and should cultivate ourselves. The strength of the mountains, the resilience of trees, the cheerfulness of flowers. Of course, there are issues that must be addressed by action, and there are times for ambition. Yet Lao Tzu's work is important for Taoists and non-Taoists alike, especially in a modern world distracted by technology and focused on what seem to be constant, sudden and severe changes. His words serve as a reminder of the importance of stillness, openness, and discovering buried yet central parts of ourselves.
Okay, so I often compare Taoism and Confucianism as very, very peaceful ways of life, right? So when we think of both of those things, we're thinking about the peacefulness of it. So kind of talking about the people, a Taoist believes that people should give up their worldly desires in favor of nature. I mean, when you watch that video, you saw a lot of nature, right? Everything was about the nature. For example, a tornado takes out your house. You're supposed to feel bad that the tornado took your house, but then you're supposed to reevaluate that and say, where else should I live besides where there's a tornado? Talking about the government, Taoists believe that leaders need to stay out of people's lives. There can be leaders, but not necessarily they need them. They need to figure it out on their own. They need to figure out life on their own, reevaluate on their own. Meditation is huge. That's what that whole video was really about, right? It's important to be with one's own self, get rid of bad things. If you've ever done meditation, meditation is you're supposed to lose everything that's in your mind and just like focus on the here and the now. Not the anxieties, nothing like that. It's kind of crazy. I give this example that I definitely don't do that. I have things running through my head all the time. And I don't think I could ever sit and do something like that. But a lot of people do, and it's awesome. I wish I could. This is the yin and the yang symbol, light and dark, right? It's basically a Taoist believes that everything is balanced in the universe. So, like, again, if you have a tornado, um, that happens, you can be mad about it, but then how do you make your life better? What's the yin is the tornado taking away your house. The yang is, okay, now I'm reevaluating. Now I'm going to balance it out with a new house or somewhere else where it's not going to happen again. Okay, so a very, very balanced life. The last one that we're going to talk about is legalism. So go ahead and take notes on legalism.
So today, we are going to present a little history lesson for you. Today, we are talking about legalism in China. Legalism started in China many years ago. Around 280 BCE, there was a man named Han Feizi. He would be the one to develop legalism in China with the thought that harsh punishment was the only way people would obey you. Legalism as a whole opposed Confucianism. He hated Confucianism so much that he described them as they prey like parasites among the body politic. It is not really known why Han Feizi hated Confucianism so much. Han Feizi believed that people would listen to strict law and cruel punishments if the law wasn't obeyed. He said that the nature of man is evil, his goodness is acquired, and that greed was the reason for most actions. He also said that a leader's greatest virtue was his strength. Han Feizi would continue to develop it even further. He also believed that a ruler must become invisible, have no desires, live a frugal life, and enforce all laws. When Han Feizi says these things, he truly believed that these were what legalist rulers must do to be fully successful and have a perfect life. However, the things in this list shouldn't be taken literally. It's saying that the ruler must live a simple, desire-free life, in which you focus most on the law and enforcing it. Legalism continued to exist in the background until 221 BCE. For many years, there were brutal wars and battles between the states, and it was thought that only harsh punishment and strict law could sort out the mess. Shang Yang, a Chinese scholar, believed that legalism was the solution during the warring period of time. At this point, Qin Shi Huangdi rose to power and unified China. He favored legalism far more than Confucianism, and he used legalism as his law and punishment system to retain control. For many years, he would go by this ideology and brutally punish people. When Qin Shi Huangdi died, the people were angry. They were angered at the ways of the Qin dynasty and how they gruesomely punished people. Later on, the Han dynasty would come to power and completely abandon legalism. Many people hated it, so they decided it would be best to just get rid of it. However, even though it's not practiced anymore, it still affects China today.
Okay, so if Confucianism and Taoism are like the peaceful type of philosophies, legalism is a little bit opposite. I'm not saying that they're going around and killing people all the time, but it is a very harsh way of philosophically. So legalists believe that people are inherently evil and therefore they need laws to keep them in line. And most of the time it's kind of a harsh law. That being said, a government in legalism is basically saying when a person breaks a law, there's a leader there to enforce those harsh punishments. They are there to enforce the laws, right? To make sure that people know not to do it again. And that's the point of legalism. So again, kind of the opposite of Confucianism and Taoism. Now, all of these are considered philosophies, right? Philosophical ways of living, very much like religion in every sense of the word, but they consider this more of a way of life. So, what's a philosophy? Well, the philosophy is the study of general and fundamental questions about reason, existence, knowledge, values, mind, and language. If you ever have to take a philosophy class, it's terrible, but it really does bring up some good examples. Like, you think about if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound, right? Another one that I talk about is there any unselfish good deed? Those are all kind of ways of thinking of deeper questions. Here are some examples of some quotes that are very philosophical, and they all are very similar. So John Wooden is a UCLA basketball coach, and he used to say, "Do not let what you cannot do interfere with what you can do." Zig Ziglar, businessman, said, "Positive thinking will let you do everything better than negative thinking will." I had a volleyball coach who used to say that, like, don't say I can't do something, because if you say I can't do something, then you're automatically not going to be able to do it. Finally, President Teddy Roosevelt said, "Do what you can with what you've got where you are." I mean, totally makes sense, right? Um, so all of those have to do with those deeper understandings of you can do things. You just have to try. Um, okay, so the next part is going to be application of these scenarios, application of this philosophy in scenarios today. So I want you to start thinking like a Confucius, a Taoist, and a legalist. And I'm going to give you real life situations in order to make you think like that. So, for example, your neighborhood floods. What would a Confucius think or do when their neighborhood floods, right? What would be their next path? So the C again stands for Confucius, and for example, a Confucius might say that really it's the people that need to contribute. Again, you need to put your community before everybody else. And the government is going to kind of step up and send in the Red Cross, send in FEMA, again, being that shining example to its people. And then, of course, your elders are going to set that example. Your grandparents, your parents, they're going to be the ones to show you, I'm going to help my neighbor. You need to do the same thing. Again, help your neighbor before you even kind of fix your own house, okay? Putting people's needs before your own. That's the key to Confucianism. Taoist. So when a neighborhood floods, a Taoist really, they're going to say, okay, it stinks that my neighborhood flooded and my house is ruined, but why do I live maybe this close to a river or to a creek where it is going to flood? Then they're going to kind of blame some laws. Maybe the government set up laws about dams or about bridges that flooded the neighborhood. If they didn't create those laws, maybe the neighborhood wouldn't have flooded, right? Maybe if they didn't stick their nose in other people's business, it wouldn't have flooded. Again, it's a very libertarian way of thinking, being a Taoist. Then you have the legalist idea, right? And you don't want to go too harsh with the legalist, but honestly, you might think, okay, what government officials didn't prepare these people? What didn't they do to prepare them for maybe a neighborhood flooding? Maybe punish people who might have made it worse. Say Nick's family has a pool and their pool flooded. Well, they're the reason. Let's punish them. Maybe send them to a year in jail, because that harsh punishment is going to teach them a lesson, right? That's a legalist point of view. You don't necessarily have to go kill someone as a harsh punishment, but it is going to seem very very rough to make an example. Again, Confucius, Taoist, they're very peaceful, where a legalist is going to go right to that quick punishment so that sets an example. All right, the next part is your turn. So you're going to be doing the disease outbreak like COVID-19 and food poisoning outbreak in local restaurants. Again, you're taking these situations as a Confucianist, a Taoist, and a legalist, just like I did before, okay? So hopefully that helps you with this. Remember, this is going to be due when you get back. All right, if you have any questions, email me, guys. Really appreciate it.